Hi, my name is Susan David. I am co-director and founder of the Institute of Coaching, and I'm also CEO of a company called Evidence-Based Psychology that is a management consultancy and coaching practice.
And Susan, I know that you are the co-editor with David Clutterbuck and David Megginson of a new book that I believe is called Beyond Goals. Is that right?
Correct. So the book is Beyond Goals, Effective Strategies for Coaching and Mentoring. And the three Davids, Susan David, David Clutterbuck, and David Megginson, we wrote this book really with the impetus of looking at how goals are used in coaching and aiming to extend and enhance the effective use of goals in our practice.
And I understand that part of what you were working with was some of the recent literature about goals and how goals could be, that there could be a negative side to goals as well.
Correct. So in many coach training programs, goals are stock standard in terms of how they are introduced and used in coaching. And we started to notice, in particular, some of the research that we did found that novice coaches tend to be very structured in their use of goals, and specifically setting SMART goals, as well as related goal strategies like the GROW process. And we started to become concerned about this because there is a fair amount of research in other fields that really talk to how the change process is really not only about the goal. There's other conversation and other transformation that needs to happen. And we became interested in how does goal setting facilitate change and coaching, and how does it hinder? Another impetus for the book was that in the management literature recently, there's been a spate of articles and very strong debate about how goals in organizations might be being overprescribed and really not fit for purpose in the agile, complex worlds that we are currently living in. So an example might be that in organizations, people might say, I set a goal with one of my staff members 6 months ago as part of their performance conversation or their development conversation, and yet that goal is now irrelevant given where our organization is at and its strategic changes that have taken place. And we were interested in the same in coaching. Are goals useful? Do they help? Do they hinder? Are they fit for purpose in the change that we're trying to work with in our clients?
So what is there in developmental relationships beyond the setting and striving to achieve goals that you feel is relevant?
There's much in coaching relationships that goes beyond goals. And interestingly, one of the people that was interviewed for this research spoke about how he can set SMART goals himself. He doesn't need to come to a coach to set goals. What he wanted to be working on in coaching was the messy stuff, using his language. The stuff that is difficult to set goals about and to necessarily define. So one of the things that I think coaching creates a space for is this reflective looking at what's going on in an individual's life and whether that is effective or not. And sometimes setting of goals prematurely in coaching can actually crowd out the space to do that kind of work. Another thing that I found in the work that I do, I am a clinical psychologist by training, working in organizations. And my PhD was on the area of emotional skills. And one of the things that we have found is that when people become overly focused on moving to solution, goal, and outcome, they actually lose the capacity to sense make, to really think and problem solve, to gain insight, and to really tap into some of the more transformative qualities that they are looking for in their growth work that really go beyond a very superficial goal.
So if I understand that correctly, in a way the goal setting allows them to jump over some of the deeper work or to go around it perhaps?
Yeah, and I think that's true for both coach and client. What we found in our research is that sometimes coaches use goals almost as a crutch because they don't want to open up a world of emotions that they might see as being prevalent to doing more clinical work with a client. So there's something that feels very safe about setting goals and about having those goals as being a structure to have a coaching conversation. But really what that does is it can often bypass the real work that happens in coaching, the real conversation, the real exploration of emotions. And when I think about this, I think of a piece of research that James Pennebaker did many years ago, and that's now been replicated, where he looks at how people process experiences. And what James Pennebaker found in his work is that the coming to insight, which is often through talking through and often actually going to emotions, is really important to the change process. And yes, I think that really what we are suggesting is that sometimes the setting of goals allows a sense of progress, but it's progress in the wrong direction. The ladder, to use Stephen Covey's terms, is up the wrong wall. The conversation needs to maybe be a different one.
Well, that would also, I would guess, relate to whether the change or the work that's being done is lasting or not. And I think there's an implication in what you're saying that if it is avoiding the larger issue, that it's not going to stick.
That's exactly. When we look at lasting change, again, another piece of research was done by Anthony Grant, where he looked at how people actually truly initiate change in their lives. And this is where they go through a process of self-reflection and then move towards objectives and outcomes. And we can't have one without the other.
The standard prescription of challenging goals is not appropriate, or even potentially dangerous in the context of a complex and rapidly changing world.
Sure. So a lot of the standard work that's been done on goal setting, for example, Locke and Latham's work, really shows that goals are best applied to very circumscribed experiences or events or challenges that people are facing. So this is often where there's something pretty routinized or where people are trying to achieve very particular targets. Goals can be very useful in that context. Goals can be less useful in the context where one is aiming for real learning. And an example of this is the brilliant work done by Carol Dweck. Carol Dweck looks at outcome goals, and she looks at how goals are often set with this basis of SMART, this traditional way that we use goals, and how an outcome focus can actually hinder learning, because what happens when someone is very focused on getting an A or achieving a particular set target is that person is less likely to be open and curious. They're less likely to look at how they might have failed, because when you set up a goal as being the end point that I'm trying to achieve, then failure isn't part of that conversation. And Carol Dweck really looks in her work at how longitudinally and in many different populations, from children to adults to sports people, how the setting of outcome-based goals that are very akin to SMART goals can hinder real work, real effectiveness, real growth, and can also be detrimental to people's well-being, can lead people to drop out more frequently because they feel that so much is resting on their goal and on their sense of achievement that they are unable to metabolize experiences that are maybe less than that goal that they were striving for. And so they become much more failure averse, if you like, and much more averse to learning from that failure. Another area that has been found to be troubling in goal setting is that very often when goals are set in a particular way that is very outcome focused and where lots of eyes are on whether the goal is being attained or not, so whether the coach's eyes are on that or whether the organization's eyes are on whether the goals are being attained or not, there is an increase in unethical behavior. and unnecessary risk-taking that happens in that context, where people will want to do anything in order to be seen to have achieved that goal.
Fascinating. It makes a lot of sense, but it wouldn't be the obvious.
Yes. And that, I think, is why this book is so exciting, because this book takes what is so anchored in coaching and in our everyday thinking and really challenges and extends the way we think about this anchor.
Can you give me a couple of examples from the book, from some of your contributors, some of the insights perhaps that they shared about advantages or limitations of goal pursuit?
Sure, I'll speak to a couple of them. One of the first people who contributed to this book and who we just loved his chapter was Bob Keegan. Bob Keegan really, in his chapter, talks about how the real work that happens in coaching is often the Trojan horse in coaching. So this hidden assumption or this hidden work that the individual needs to do that often pertains to the real life that they want to be living. And he speaks about how goals can actually limit that discussion or limit effectiveness when it comes to that Trojan horse. So Bob Keegan talks about many of the limitations, and he speaks about the goals beyond the goals. What are the true goals in coaching that are sometimes not surfaced in initial goal setting? Another contributor, David Rock, speaks about the neuroscience behind goal setting and speaks about work that's been done that looks at the difference between why goals, why do I want to do something, versus how goals, what do I want to be doing and how is it that I should be doing that. And really what they talk about is almost horses for courses, that different types of goals apply to different contexts. Richard Boyatzis, who is another contributor, also speaks to this, but in a different way. So he speaks to how people might set almost negatively oriented goals. If I don't achieve this thing that I want to achieve, then I am going to be in trouble, or then I'm not going to lead the life that I want to live, and how that goal might be framed negatively. And as its opposite, how goals can be framed constructively and positively in terms of what I want to become and my ideal self. And Richard Boyatzis presents some fabulous work on the neuroimaging, on how different types of goals and different types of positive versus negative goals actually facilitate different neurophysiological and neuropsychological processes. So a number of wonderful, wonderful contributions, and I've mentioned three, but many, Kathy Crum, Sir John Whitmore, all exploring in their own way how goals might be better used and better set in coaching.
What surprises did you encounter as you were compiling and reviewing the material from the contributors?
Well, one of the main surprises is that we asked a number of leading thinkers in coaching and in goal setting to write a chapter, but we didn't prescribe which chapter they wrote or what it was that they actually focused on. And one of the things that was truly surprising for us is how many of the contributors really reflected on the idea that goal setting comes really from the industrial age and is really about how much people need to produce in a factory in a given period of time. And what is underpinning this idea is the idea that goals are linear and that there's a very simple path between A and B. That it is, if one has a B in mind, one can set about achieving that goal by putting particular conditions in place. However, many of the contributors really started to ask questions about whether goal setting as it is currently understood is fit for purpose in what is essentially a non-linear context. Human beings are complex. We have multiple parameters and multiple variables that we bring to the table if we think about our thoughts, our emotions, our behaviors, our situation. And then when you take that complexity of individuals and you interface that with a organization that has its own complexities and with a world in which there are socio-geographic pressures and globalization, really what we have is a situation in which there is non-linearity. And I'm going to say that again. Really what we have is a situation of non-linearity where complexity is the norm in the worlds that we live in, and where goal setting in the way that it's currently conceptualized is not fit for that. So one of the real surprises was how these leading thinkers in goal theory were really questioning at a fundamental level whether goals as they are currently used and taught in coaching programs are actually fit for purpose.
It's fascinating. What I think I just heard is that a very, very simple construct of what goals are and why they're used is being connected to an extremely complex situation, and there's a disconnect.
Yes, that's exactly that goals are taught in coaching and often used in programs in a relatively simple way. And if we think about one of the core goals of coaching, or core objectives of coaching, a core objective is very often about change, about human change. And for most of us, we know that if we set a goal that we want to lose a number of pounds in a given number of weeks, or if we want to achieve a particular output, that we can set those goals until we're blue in the face. Setting goals that it's not enough, and as mentioned before, they can actually be counterproductive in terms of masking the real conversation that needs to take place and the real work that needs to take place.
What's the next frontier in goals?
Well, it's interesting. One of the things that I spoke about in the book when I was writing the foreword was that I am an avid goal setter myself, and it for me was really striking in this work because I think the frontier really in terms of goal setting is starting to take what has been a relatively simple, relatively overprescribed construct in management theory and in coaching, and really starting to extend our theory and our understanding of goal setting. So I don't think goals are going to go away anytime soon, and I think that goals serve their purpose, and there are many chapters in the book that speak to this. But I think that what we are looking at in coaching is a new frontier when it comes to the setting of goals, where there is going to be more research and more theory and more thoughtfulness that will be applied to what types of goals we set for what contexts and which goals are more effective for which applications. And I think this is really a level of sophistication that we have not seen in coaching, and by the same token, we have not yet seen in organizations. And I think that that's where goal setting is going.